What is the proportional response for you if your family is raped and killed?
Anger, a lot of which is directed towards the Prime Minister, who has spent the last year at the very least condemning Israel with all of his heart and soul. You know, in Israel, they are saying that this attack was directed by Hamas.
We have to be the ones who stand up for civilization, who stand against terrorism.
You look at the Israel protests, they're always peaceful and well behaved. The Palestinian protests have a tendency towards violence.
The horrific scenes in Manchester, England this morning, where 2 Jews were killed outside their synagogue on one of the most holy days of their calendar. Jon Levine from the Washington Free Beacon is still with me. Some remarkable guests we had in there in the first part. Before we get into the sort of wider cultural anti-Semitic problems around the West, Lord Warney there, who's a former government advisor, Jon Levine, who's a former Israeli government spokesman, very clear that ministers should bear responsibility for this. A fascinating point I thought there at the end where the failures of the UN were put on the table by Lord Warney. I know it's an issue dear to your heart. It is a bit of a farce, isn't it? That,
it's a lot of a farce, I would say.
Yeah, and is that point over? In some magical, mythical world, would we all be able to get on if we had a proper way of talking?
The idea that the United Nations has any business telling a country how they should defend themselves from a genocidal death cult that wants to kill them all is ridiculous. And Lord Walney mentioned proportional response. What is the proportional response for you if your family is raped and killed?
Yeah.
What is your proportional response? You have to destroy the evil completely. There can't be a tiny speck of it left alive at the end.
I mean, that's the problem is that Israel faces, is because they've been trying to do that while also fight this information battle that the guests have mentioned. At the same time, being unable to, they may well have taken the senior leadership of Hamas out, 3 times now? 3 times over, but, the Kalashnikovs are still going into kids' hands, right?
I'm sorry the kids are getting jazzed up with TikTok and social media, but the fundamental fact remains Israel has an obligation to defend the lives of their people. And if you're living across the street from this cancer, you don't negotiate with cancer. There's no ceasefire with cancer. You have to kill it or it kills you.
Do you think, what's your take on this? We saw Netanyahu move on Monday. There was still no sign from Hamas on that. Do you think they'll come to the table? Jon Levine there didn't sound too.
It's Hamas. My gut is always don't assume they're going to come to the table. And even if they do, don't assume they'll come in good faith. But what's different this time is you have all the Arab countries buying in. You have Turkey and Qatar and Egypt being like, look, guys, we're on board with the deal. So they're going to be able to exert a lot of pressure on Hamas. And they're truly isolated and alone this time. So we'll see.
What did you make of Lord Protector of Palestine, Donald Trump, being actually in charge of the Gaza Strip under the terms of and a return for Tony Blair?
Lord Protector of Palestine. This is just like in the 30s and the 20s when we had the British commissioner. Funny, I'm more optimistic about the peace plan than Douglas Murray was. I mean, obviously there are some unpalatable things, but I broadly like it if Hamas agrees to the terms. They're out of government, they're disarmed, you get some kind of...
The mask has really slipped with some people, isn't it? Because they're saying, well, there's no place for Hamas in this deal. It's like, well, hang on, you're saying the quiet bit out loud now. We all knew that...
Now suddenly, it's a genocide, but let's keep it going a little longer. Right.
Let's bring in some more guests. I think down the line we have Jake Wallis Simons, author and former editor of the Jewish Chronicle and friend of Harry Cole Saves the West. And we have also Sarah Koch from the Foreign Affairs Professor. Jake, to you first. I'm sorry again to be talking to you, as I've said to Jon Levine before the break, in such awful circumstances. Can I get your response to what's happened today, and the remarkable admission there from Lord Walney, I don't know if you heard, who essentially agreed that ministers in Sir Keir Starmer's government, Sir Keir Starmer himself, this government, have blood on their hands.
Yeah, I mean, this was a crime, it turns out, perpetrated by somebody whose name is literally jihad. You couldn't make it up. It's emerged this evening. But look, it's been a long day. The holiest day in the Jewish calendar began with that depravity in Manchester. And frankly, the response has been so dispiriting. I thought that I couldn't be shocked about the depths that people would go to, but actually it turns out there's always a further level of depravity because people, I think the worst thing about it really has been seeing people on the left who spent the last 2 years criticizing, smearing, frankly lying about Israel in the most lurid terms, seizing upon this moment as an opportunity to pose not as anti-Semites, to use this attack to express their condolences for the Jewish people as if they weren't encouraging this kind of hatred all along. And I'm afraid that Keir Starmer isn't completely in the clear for this. Don't forget, last week, Hamas were congratulating him on recognizing a Palestinian state. And today, he's decrying or lamenting a Hamas-style attack on our shores in Manchester. The two things rather don't add up, if you ask me.
I mean, obviously beyond the horrific sense of betrayal, what is the mood like tonight in the community, in the Jewish community? There was, I have a horrible sense of a crashing sense of inevitability about this attack. Is there concerns that enough has been done? It seems to be that the British government all but outsourced a lot of the protection of synagogues to charities like the Community Security Trust. What is the mood like tonight, and what more can be done, do you think, Jake?
Well, there's so many emotions, I think, in Jews up and down the country. Firstly, there is, as I've said, that anger, a lot of which is directed towards the Prime Minister, who has spent the last year, at the very least, condemning Israel with all of his heart and soul and leaving Hamas almost completely unscathed in his rhetoric, and particularly recognising the Palestinian state without even asking Hamas to release the hostages first. That all is one big betrayal that's whipped up people against the Jews. He has a lot of responsibility for a lot of the hatred, I think. But also there's fear, of course, and anguish. Jews have been living with tight security for a very long time. I think it's unusual for people in the mainstream to know what living as a Jew today is like. There aren't very many Jews in Britain, 250,000 or so, less than 1% of the overall population. So many people don't know many Jews, and Orthodox Jews in particular live with tight security, almost like airport-style security at their synagogues, their schools, and elsewhere. I grew up in the Orthodox community in the 80s and 90s, and it was bad then. There was security at synagogues then. And my school had several bomb scares. We had to be evacuated. We had thugs coming around. I had a physics teacher called Mr. Paget, who was an ex-copper, who marched people out when they came to have a go at us. That was happening then, and it's only got worse since. And it seems to peak every time Israel is called upon to defend itself against jihadism. That's when it really lifts its mask and people come out and try to attack Jews in this country as a kind of excuse. So people are used to that, but the fact that this was a deadly attack makes people feel very concerned indeed. We're used to living with this threat, but this has taken it to a different level.
Sarah Knoch, Foreign Affairs Professor, thank you for joining us tonight. Do Western governments have a responsibility for the scenes we've seen today? And do you believe the sort of geopolitical machinations we've seen in the last few weeks have betrayed Jewish communities in their countries?
Absolutely, they have. As you said, the Western governments are really the leaders of the Western world, but they're also, they have the funding, they have the military, and the influence in places like the UN. And so they are the leaders, and they've completely shirked their responsibility on that front. And this is what you get when that happens. We have to be the ones who stand up for civilization, who stand against terrorism, or it's going to come to our shores too.
I want to play all of you a clip and get your response. This is Bob Villan, who, some people will know from Glastonbury, where he led a chant of death to the IDF. But let's see what he's been saying recently.
Get out there and fight them. Get out there and meet them in the street. Get out there and let them know that you do not stand by them. Do you understand me?
Get out there and fight them. He's talking about directly attacking Jewish people in the street. Jake, how have we got to a situation where, this is not just normalised, but cheered on by, people who would otherwise consider themselves incredibly progressive, good, moral people, drugged up kids at Glastonbury cheering and joining in death to the IDF. And look at that crowd. We're delighted by what Villan was saying. I know everyone's got such an appropriate name today, Bob Villan.
Yeah, I think it's something to do with being on the left. If you have the misfortune to be on the left, then you're likely to be on the wrong side of this argument. There's a sort of worship of your own virtue, of your own self-righteousness that goes on, where you have the monopoly on all goodness. And the Jews, unfortunately, have been cast by the left after decades of Soviet-inspired propaganda. The Jews have been cast as the agents of capitalism, the agents of so-called colonialism, even though Israel is one of the greatest anti-colonial states in history, and are seen as white supremacists and all the other smears and slurs that we've had for decades. And so the left sees them as the enemy, sees Jews as bad, Israel as bad, as the enemy. And the more radical they can be against the Jews in Israel, the better they feel about themselves. So really it's a way of performing their own virtue, performing their own politics. And also I think they see it as a kind of anti-establishment position as well. They see the Jews in Israel representing the British establishment, the West as a whole, Western democracy, all the things that they like to rail against in their kind of adolescent steroidal hormonal fit, you know. I think it's an expression of that. It's like a massive tantrum is what it is, and no one more tantrumy than Bob Villain. Sadly, it got very, very serious today when it mixed with, apparently, with Islamism. You know, in Israel, they are saying that this attack was directed by Hamas. We don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they're saying over there. This does seem to be very sinister. When you have tantrumy woke people meeting Islamism, it's a very deadly cocktail indeed.
Jon Levine, what can they do to Israel and Jewish communities in Western countries? What can they do to fight back on this information war?
Well, you know, it's funny. Israel definitely is losing the information war.
As Charlie Kirk,
I was just about to say that.
Wrote to Netanyahu himself in the weeks before he died.
Unsolicited advice to Netanyahu in the weeks before his assassination, saying, look, you know, what I'm hearing on TikTok, what I'm seeing among the kids that I talk to is very disturbing. And he laid out, I think a 7 or 8 point plan being like, here's what you need to do. And one of them was having sort of college campus style events that he does with people. And he's changed so many hearts and minds on so many issues. And people said, Charlie, don't go on college campuses. They're too crazy. You won't be able to reach them. And he said, no. And he went there, and he's winning the argument there, and Israel can do the same.
Sierra Knoch, Foreign Affairs Professor, still with us, I believe. Sierra, what can Israel do to turn this around? And you know, as John's saying there, they are losing this information war, unfairly or otherwise. What would be your advice, Professor?
Well, absolutely. They are definitely losing the information war, and they're a bit late to the game here in terms of, you know, trying to turn it around. They have, they recently signed a deal with an American media company to promote content on social media and find influencers and build up a public diplomacy campaign in that way. And of course, they're targeting the U.S. because, you know, we're one of their most important allies, if not their most important ally. But I really think they have to go bigger. They have to look at Europe and what's happened in Europe, and maybe it's going to be harder there. But it's integral to them, maintaining their stance in the world, because you do have all of these tides that are turning against Israel through these disinformation campaigns. And of course, it's one thing to blame the media and blame the mainstream media, but, Israel has to be out there providing the facts for people to push back on as well.
Final point for Jake Wallis Simons. Sorry. This march planned for Saturday through central London. We're seeing violence, outside Downing Street tonight. They're clashing, protesters clashing with cops. This is going to be, if I can swear, is it after 10 o'clock in the UK, possibly? It's going to be a bit of a S show, isn't it?
It is indeed, and we've seen actually Palestinian protesters on the streets of London and indeed elsewhere in the country this evening in the wake of this horrendous anti-Semitic murder, the worst that we've had in quite some time in Britain. They've been, out on the streets, bringing the transport system to a halt at Liverpool Street Station and elsewhere, waving their flags, clashing quite violently with police. Take a step back and you look at the Israel protests, they're always peaceful and well-behaved. The Palestinian protests have a tendency towards violence, and there's only going to be more of it.
Well, let's both of you come back and talk to us again about that after the weekend. I suspect we know what those scenes are going to look like.